Good morning, everyone. Once again, thanks for joining me for my Facebook Live or for checking me out at your own convenience. I appreciate you checking me out. I also appreciate all the feedback I keep getting, the encouragement, coaching. It's all super good. Now, Sunday is Book Club Sunday. It's a chance when I get to review the book I read of the week. And today, I'll be honest, we're going to have a few challenges. I'm working from a completely new tech platform here, new computers, new equipment, new software stuff, and suffice it to say, it hasn't all been working. So if this stops in the middle or drops out, just know that the IT department here at the Stowers House will be on it and back. But let's see if we can't get through 15 minutes on our book club today. That being said, I'm excited and a little anxious, and even I have a little trepidation about this week's book, which is 10x is easier than 2x. 10x is easier by 2x by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Ben Hardy. And here's why I'm anxious about this: is the book's in my iPad's about 550 pages, and I could do a review literally for an hour on every 100 pages. Like if I was doing this in a book club format, I'd probably do maybe 4 half-hour segments, maybe do a 2-hour review, because there's just so many great layers to this book. Now, the book is really easy to understand. The premise of the book is this, right? It's easier to do 10x than 2x. 2x is just running faster on the hamster wheel. Going, if I just put more energy, more labor, more resources, I'll get incremental gain. So 2x is just trying harder, working harder, but doing the same thing. 2x is being linked into the past. 10x is creating audacious goals that are impossible, that make you get off the hamster wheel and walk a different and run a different direction, to do things totally different, right? And so what it really comes down to, the core of the book is, look, if you just follow Pareto's principle, if you only focus on the 20% of the things that are giving you 80% of your results all of the time, you'll have a transformative change. That's the basis of the book. I mean, so in one way, we could wrap up at minute 2 here and go, you understand the book. But there's so many nuggets inside of this book. There's hundreds of little morsels of mind candy. There's tons of stuff to contemplate. If you were to read the book's easy to read too, by the way, and it has a whole bunch of stories in it. It's well written. It talks about all sorts of other successful entrepreneurs. And so read the book. I did an interesting thing. I both read the book on my iPad and I listened to it on Audible. And this comes from, I started reading a book called $100 Million Offers. And the author of that book repeatedly said the best way to get the content of this book is to read it and listen to it on Audible. And so I've listened to the $100 Million Offers, but I haven't read it. As soon as I read it, I'll use it in our book club, so I'll be in a future Sunday. But in this book, 10x is easier than 2x, I actually did both. And it was interesting because in the Audible, Dr. Hardy, he interviews Dr. Sullivan in between chapters. So if the Audible is, 8 hours running time, 2 hours is just Ben interviewing Dan and getting Dan's insight. You don't get that in the book, which is fascinating. So there you go. But going on, so the book starts out with the introduction, and the introduction, the author really uses, and by the way, Ben Hardy is the author. Dan Sullivan is the content creator. So Dan Sullivan's been an entrepreneur coach for 50 years, has a world-class entrepreneurial training company, and has dealt with thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of entrepreneurs, and he's created all sorts of processes and systems that help them maximize their opportunities. And then he's partnered with Ben Hardy, Dr. Hardy, who is a organizational psychologist or something like that. And so Ben brings in the technical, psychological stuff. Dan brings in the experiences, processes, stuff that have worked. So Ben writes the book. But in the introduction, they talk about Michelangelo and how Michelangelo continually kept 10xing what he was doing. And it's a really good example. It's a good way to start off. Now, I'll tell you, it's interesting. Hey, Chris Welton, good to see you. Thanks for coming on, buddy. Michelangelo continually 10x, and it's a good example. And they use Michelangelo to bring up the concept of psychological flexibility. They also talked about a concept which, I'll be honest, I had to read this like 4 or 5 times. I still didn't thoroughly understand it, which is context versus content. That when we become our context, not our content, that's the pathway to moving forward, which, so by the way, Chris Welton's on live. Thank you so much. Chris Welton, Chris, I featured your book in my first week, One Jordan. And so, Chris, I think you've sent Dr. Hardy a book, and has he accepted your One Jordan shoe, and you have a call step. That's awesome, man. That is awesome. And Chris, I got to get you on here. I'm so sorry. We talked the other day. I didn't invite you. You would be a great guest on one of my podcasts. You'd be my fledgling podcast. But anyway, back to 10x is easier than 2x. He really talked about the psychological flexibility. And the first chapter, I was going to say, the first chapter is like 20% of the book. I mean, the introduction is like 20% of the book. Like, you get through the introduction, you're like, man, that just took like an hour. Whoa. But in the introduction, they talk about the 10x operating system, which is dramatically expanding your vision and standards, simplifying your strategies and focus, identifying and removing your non-essentials, developing, mastering unique areas, and then leading and empowering others. And they also introduced the 4 freedoms. The 4 freedoms are a really big deal. The 4 freedoms are freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of relationship, and freedom of purpose. Freedom of time means that you can choose to spend time on things that you value, things that you want to do. Freedom of money is that you don't have to worry about money. Freedom of relationship is you get to work and associate with who you want. And freedom of purpose is freedom to pursue your purpose and your mastery. And then also they wrapped up the introduction with talking about the infinite game, because 10xing is about living an infinite game. It's not about scarcity. It's about abundance. Getting into chapter 1, they start getting into the mindset of 2x versus 10x. This is where they talk about Pareto's principle. This is where they talk about if you just constantly focus on 20%, that's how you're going to have transformative change. And then they really go deep in why impossible goals are better than easy goals. Because incremental increase is harder because it just means you got to somehow run faster. Where totally impossible goals means you have to break it and change everything, and it's actually easier to do. Chapter 2 is the quality of everything you do. And this out of this one chapter, and this is a recurring theme throughout the book, is simply is this one statement is that how you do anything is how you do everything. And this is really important because if you want to 10x your health, or you want to 10x your income, or you want to 10x your work, whatever the life equity you're wanting to 10x, you can't 10x one, or you can't adopt the habits and the skill set and the processes that 10x one thing and then live 2x something else. And so once you start to adopt a 10x strategy, it becomes transformative in all areas of your life, in your marriage, in your relationship with your kids, in your spirituality, because you start focusing on the 20% that is really the heart of all that all the time, and it expands it. In this chapter 2, they also bring up and talk about extensively on Atomic Habits by James Clear. You really cover that book well. That is a super popular book, one of the best-selling books of all time. And they talk about how trying to shed your 2x identity is really difficult because people want to avoid loss. They overvalue what they currently have, and they want to be consistent. But the key there, the way they ended the chapter is the identity. Your identity is the story you believe about yourself and the standard you hold yourself to. And standards are going to be a really big topic in another chapter. So chapter 2 is a really good chapter. Chapter 3 goes, 10x embraces abundance and rejects its scarcity. And this chapter brings up a really important concept, and that is wanting versus needing, or needers versus wanters, right? And what it has to do is wanting is about abundance and creation. Wanting requires no justification, where needing is extrinsically motivated, and needing is security driven. Needing is scarcity mindset. Needing is reactive. And so, and it's very much like, are you avoid pain or seek pleasure? Wanters, go further, faster, better because they're going towards what they want, not avoiding what they fear. And then in this chapter, they bring up the two types of freedom. And the two types of freedom are freedom from and freedom to. Once again, freedom from is avoidance. Freedom to is internally choosing where you're going. And so this whole chapter is just about scarcity mindset, scarcity versus abundance mindset, and the mindset you need to 10x. And you have to believe in the infinite game. You have to believe in abundance. You have to believe that you're not limited by other people's restrictions. And the chapter kind of wraps up. It goes, scarcity trains people to believe freedom and creativity are scarce. Society trains people to believe freedom and creativity are scarce resources to compete for, but that's just simply not true. Money is finite while wealth is infinite. And then, in the chapter, they start to introduce, and this is a topic throughout the book, the flow state. And being in the flow state occurs when you embrace your unique ability, because you're not overly editing yourself based on external approval, attachments, and outcomes. Your flow state is when you're serving your highest and best needs, when you're just working your unique ability. And flow state is the other thing that leads to 10x. And when you speak of mastery is the ability to do something uniquely well. So that was chapter 3. There's only 6 chapters, so we're flying through this pretty good, guys. We're staying on time. Chapter 4. This is chapter 4 and chapter 6. I think are really interesting, and here's why. You know what they do in chapter 4? They essentially do a book review of their book, The Gap and the Gain. So the two authors have written, I think, 4 books now. Gap. I'm going to talk about one in a minute, but Gap and the Gain. I will tell you, and I'm sure my friend Dave Savage will at some point listen to at least a few minutes of this book review. And he sent me The Gap and the Gain, and he said, "Ron, you got to read this book." And by the way, not in a positive way. I wouldn't say he said that in a positive way, right? And not that it was negative, but I definitely tend to living in the gap, and the people that 10x, the people that have the most success, they live in the gain. And here's what that means. Like, here's where we are today. Here's where we want to go. Let's say in our travels that we're right here. Now, the people that live in the gain, they celebrate where they've gone. Like, they're like, look how well we've done. Look how far we've come. Look how much we've changed. Look how much we've accomplished. People that live in the gap go, look how far we have to go. How come we haven't gone further? We need to achieve more, right? And people that live in the gain actually achieve a lot more, and they have a happier life, and people like being around them. People that live in the gap are miserable. They're burnt out. The people around them are burnt out. And so it's interesting. So Dave, I appreciate you sending me that book. But in this chapter 4, they really just talk about the concepts of the gap and the gain, and just try to coach you to live in the gain and tell you why the gain is so important. And one of the things that they say is, look, a 10x approach to life is regenerative, in that you do it over and over and over again, because the ideals that you're trying to achieve are like the horizon. You can always see it, but you can't get there. It keeps moving further away, because your mastery there isn't a destination. It's a process, right? And so that's chapter 4. Chapter 5, which is, I think the subtitle is "Take 150 plus free days per year." The math on that was kind of kooky, but because they count weekends and holidays, and so that gets you half of it right there. But anyway, not to get off path here. The concept in this, though, that a good concept in this chapter is Kairos versus Chronos time. Kairos time it can only be experienced when you're fully present and absorbed in the moment. let's just say that's Kairos time. You're fully present, you're fully engaged, you're fully absorbed. That's your flow state, right? Your flow state. Where Chronos time is just time. It's just tick, 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 tick. And Chronos time goes whether you're present or not. It just exists, right? And so when they talk about Kairos versus Chronos, they're like, to go 10x, you have to exist in Kairos time. You have to be in flow. You have to be fully absorbed, right? And then they start talking about just times and how to spend your time. And they really argued to quite some length, look, going 10x means working less. Going 10x means you have to rest more. The amount that you rest and rejuvenate is directly correlated to how much success you can have. And so they really talk about recovery. They talk about practice. They they talk about how focus is contraction, recovery is expansion. And then just working less is essential to having exponential gains. And so chapter 5 is all about time management, calendar management, managing your whole focus on how you spend your time. And it's completely a change in how you look at it. And then getting into chapter 6, the final chapter, this is where they really highlight one of their other books. They spend half the chapter really talking about their book, Who, Not How. And the idea is, in order to actually achieve 10x, you can't do it by yourself. You first free yourself to focus on the 20% that is your unique ability and it gives you most of your results. And then you free the people in your company to do the same thing. You have a self-managing company, a company full of people that are also striving to achieve their 20% and then redoing their 20% and redoing their 20%. They also talk about the evolution on entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs start as rugged individuals that do everything themselves. Then they move on to having a who-focused leadership, where they start to realize they got to bring on more people into the team, so they focus on the who. And then they start to create a self-managing company where the right who's are working towards their 20%, achieving their 20%. And then finally, the fourth level is where you have the right who's that are doing their 20%, but that they start to multiply their 20%, meaning you figure out, hey, what's my 20% today, and you get to it, and then you go, hold on, now my 20%, what's my 20% of that? And then you go, what's my, like, it's a transfer, it's an evolution, it's a path. And so that the fourth level is when you have everybody in your company continuing to hone down their new 20%, their new 20%, their new 20%. And the 80% they're handing off is somebody else's 20%. And that's how you have an exceptionally productive company that goes 10x. They also, in this chapter, they talked about self-determination theory, which is autonomy, mastery, and relatedness. I'm being super brief on some of this stuff. I could have gone into hundreds of different topics. I'm breezing through it because I know it's Sunday and you guys don't want to hear 2 hours of me talking about this book. I will tell you in the conclusion, my favorite part about the conclusion was that they went pretty deep on power versus force by Dr. David Hawking. And I can't wait to read that book. That's on my reading list. I haven't read it. I did listen to somebody talk about it. I think Chris at our past mastermind. I think maybe Ben talked about it. I can't wait to read it. If you read this book, 10x versus 2x, there's maybe 20 great book recommendations. Whenever I read a book, I always keep a list of the books they recommend, and I put them on my reading list. There's a ton of good quotes. There's all sorts of good case studies. I think the book has nearly 10 case studies that some of the people you'll be familiar with. You'll really like it. That's the book. That's this week's book club. Thank you for checking me out if you did it. Like I said, keep the feedback coming. By next week, I might have some of this technology figured out and be a little bit more refined on this. But I hope everybody had a great week. I hope everybody had a great weekend. Doesn't next week feel like people aren't working? Like the July 4th Thursday, are we just taking Friday off till next Monday? What's the plan here? As I've been trying to set up appointments, it's been kind of hard to do because people are leery. I think they're definitely taking a summer week off. But I hope you guys are having a great start to a long, maybe holiday week. Be safe out there. I look forward to seeing you all again.